Welcome to Even Tacos Fall Apart, the podcast that dives deep into the intricacies of life, including grief, resilience, and the profound impact of beliefs on our healing journeys. I'm MommaFoxFire, and in today's episode, we'll be exploring the profound topic of how belief in life after death can influence our grieving process. Grief is a universal experience that touches our lives in various ways, and your belief system can significantly shape your personal grieving journey. In this episode, we embark on a thought-provoking exploration of how different beliefs about the afterlife can impact the way we navigate loss and find meaning and seek solace. I talk with Bob Ginsberg about how differing perspectives on life after death, from religious and spiritual beliefs to philosophical and cultural traditions, and even mediumship, make a difference to how the living are able to move forward after loss. Our conversation sheds light on how these beliefs shape the understanding of mortality and provide comfort during times of grief. Whether you hold firm beliefs already or you're curious about different perspectives, this episode invites you to explore the profound impact of belief systems on the grieving process. We'll delve into ways in which faith, spirituality, and hope for an afterlife can influence coping mechanisms, finding meaning, and fostering resilience. Join us on this compassionate and insightful journey as we embrace the complexities of grief and the diverse ways individuals find solace and healing. Because even when tacos fall apart, our beliefs can guide us toward healing, meaning, and the hope that transcends life's most challenging moments. Welcome. I hope you are having a fantastic day today. Happy Mental Health Monday. I'm super excited for the conversation tonight. As some of you know, my family had some news this past week. Makes this topic highly relevant. We're going to be talking about how a belief in life after death can impact the grieving process and some things kind of tangentially around that. So I'm very excited to be joined tonight by Bob Ginsberg. Thank you for joining us today, Bob. Really appreciate you being here.
My pleasure. Happy to join you.
Bob started researching the evidence for survival of consciousness soon after his daughter died in 2002. Devastated by the loss, he needed science to tell him if she still existed in some form. And in 2004, Bob and his wife, Phran, founded Forever Family Foundation, which you can find at foreverfamilyfoundation.org, which is a global not-for-profit that educates the public about evidence that we are more than our physical bodies. And Bob hosts the Signs of Life radio show, is the past editor of Signs of Life magazine, heads the Foundation's Medium Evaluation Certification Program, writes a blog at beyondthefivesenses.com, and is the author of The Medium Explosion. Bob, Phran, and the Foundation are currently featured in the Netflix docuseries Surviving Death, and sadly, Phran passed to the spirit realm on September 22nd, 2020. I've got some socials, I've got some websites for you guys. I'm going to post those into the chat here for you. If you want any more connection points with Bob, you're welcome to connect on any of those. And Bob, like I said, thank you so much for being here with us tonight. I really am looking forward to this conversation.
I look forward to it as well.
So you wear a lot of hats. Like we just talked about 5-6 different things that you do, have done, from your foundation to the radio show, to the blog, to the docuseries. How do you balance those with your everyday life?
Well, I just added another hat because my home was destroyed in Hurricane Ian. So now I spend most of my day trying to find and manage contractors. But in all seriousness, I mean, all those things, they're good distractions for me. I mean, I need to keep busy and you mentioned, my wife passed away. She was the true force behind the foundation, and there were a lot of things that she tried to teach me that I wasn't so amenable to learning, and now I'm forced to do it all myself. So I've been, I enjoy writing. So I mean, the blog and the books and that kind of stuff is something that I always wanted to do, anyways. So. You do what you need to do, you just keep going.
Yeah, I definitely recognize that.
I have been that way in the past with some life events that have happened, and it's just like, if you don't have something to do, where you're just gonna sit on the couch and melt into the cushions, maybe. It does sound appealing sometimes.
Yeah, I was once being interviewed by a psychologist, and she had asked me a question about things that I do, to help. And I talked about all the distractions that I have. And when the program was over, she said to me, you're going about grief all wrong. And I said, really? I mean, how am I doing it wrong? She says, well, the distractions are preventing you from facing your grief. And I said, no, I disagree. I mean, I have plenty of time to face my grief, but you need a break once in a while, and I think distractions are good, but it just shows you that everybody grieves differently,
Yeah.
and there really is no right or wrong.
Yeah, that's something we've talked about before, is just that your grief is not going to look like my grief, and my grief is not going to look like Bite Mark's grief, and like everything is going to look a little bit different for everybody. There might be some common threads, there might be some common elements for most people, but it's completely different sometimes. I forgot to mention that at the top, we do have a question queue open. If you have a question, do what Bite Mark did in the chat right there and type in !Q, type in your question, and we'll make sure to ask it as we go along here. So speaking of, Bite Mark did ask a question. She said, what is your favorite poem?
Well, I was an English major in college, and I think I read too many poems, I mean, from the old masters, and I haven't read poems in a really long time. And I'm the type that when I read a poem, I just enjoy it as I'm reading it, and I don't really make a note as to the author or whatever. But I have to say that my favorite poem is a poem that my daughter wrote when she was 13 years old, called "The Wonder Awaits." And the poem is a beautiful poem about questioning what happens after we physically die, and how she was going to come back and let us all know. It was somewhat of a prophetic poem, that she wrote, and you wonder how, what 13-year-old, writes, poems like that. But I'd have to rate that as my favorite poem, "The Wonder Awaits."
Absolutely. We've had all answers on here from poems that people have written themselves or that loved ones have written for them. I think this might be the first one that a daughter has written, though. That's wonderful. That's fantastic. Well, thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that. What a statement you're going about grief all wrong. Kind of makes me want to write a poem. There you go. Could write a poem titled that. That's great. So what's your favorite thing about working in the field of grief and belief, and what are some of the challenges that you've found along the way?
Working in this area is sort of like a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it can be draining. I mean, we hold these grief retreats, in different parts of the country, and one of the retreats was filmed by Netflix in that docuseries that you mentioned, Surviving Death. And at every retreat, because I was one of those people, that attended the retreat. I mean, the grief is heavy, and some of the people, they could barely, talk. And, if you have any empathy and compassion, that affects you. It can't not affect you. On the other hand, I see the tangible effects, when they leave the retreat, and some people all of a sudden, they're laughing and they're joking, and they have effects on their grief that are very positive and last, when for a long period of time or forever when they leave. So there's like a lot of things. There's rewards, and there's pain, and I always used to wonder, how do people work in hospice? I mean, working with the dying every day. I said, it must be tremendously depressing. But when you talk to people that work in hospice, it's the opposite. They get to sit. It becomes like a sacred moment. With the people that are dying, and have a totally different outlook on it. So, I also. I think what happens when you have suffered tragedy in your life, like losing a child, you're kind of stripped down to nothing. I mean, everything, your world blows apart. I mean, everything that you all your dreams, all your material stuff. I mean, they don't mean anything anymore. And the only thing that truly gives you any comfort at all, is being able to help somebody else. So and I used to scoff at people that used to say that. If you asked me that 20 years ago, I said, yeah. But it became true when I lived it. I mean, my world was blown apart. But yet, like, if I'd sit and I talked to somebody and I made a difference in their lives, okay, that gave me a little bit of joy. There's something to that. I think that in helping others, you help yourself.
I think that's beautiful. I agree. It's hard to see, like, okay, helping other people could be helping me too, but truly, if you go and you have somebody saying, "Hey, you really made an impact on me," or "I really appreciated our conversation," or any of that, it's so affirming and it makes you feel so warm and fuzzy on the inside to get that feedback and to know that you did something positive for somebody else, even if it didn't help you personally in that moment, that you were helping that other person at the time. It's just good to be able to help other people.
Absolutely.
Even from a place of pain. Do you have an all-time favorite movie that you think everybody should see?
There's a movie that came out that probably nobody ever heard of. It came out in 2002, and it's called Dragonfly, and it stars Kevin Costner. And the premise is that Kevin Costner is a doctor who's grieving the loss of his own wife, and his wife starts coming to him through people that had near-death experiences. And if you're familiar with the near-death experience, and we could talk about that. So, at the time, when I first watched it, I mean, I was interested, of course, because my daughter had passed, but it was sort of like, I really didn't believe in an afterlife, so it was like sort of like science fiction to me. But when I started learning and researching, it was based on, real evidence. It's a very powerful movie, and that's all those, it's been 20 years, and it still remains one of my favorite movies.
Oh my gosh, it has been 20 years since 2002. That's crazy. That's crazy to me right there. It does not feel like it's been 20 years. Well, I added that to my Real Good so I can go back and watch it. It comes up first thing whenever you search for it. So there's a link to that in the chat also. Weimar said, "I feel like helping other people and seeing them feel better helps me believe that I can feel better eventually too." That's a really good point as well. It's that piece of hope that you're A, distributing, but then B, giving back to yourself at the same time. That's really, yeah. So before we jump into this topic more in depth, you've mentioned your daughter's death, and I know that it brought you into this research. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you went from grieving the loss of your daughter and into the research side?
Yeah, I can give you some background. So if you go back to prior to 2002, I was a purely, left brain thinker. I was open to ideas, but if you told me about survival of consciousness or, of survival of bodily death, that we went someplace else, I would tell you that it's just a fairy tale, like believing in Santa Claus is just not real. And then on the morning of September 1st, 2002, my wife shot up in bed at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, "What's the matter?" And she was shaking, trembling, and violently. I said, "What's the matter?" And she wouldn't talk. I said, "Come on, you got to tell me what's the matter." And she looked at me, and her eyes were just staring straight ahead. And she said, "Something is horrible is going to happen today." And I said, "What does that mean? What does that mean?" She said, "I can't tell you, but our lives are going to be changed forever, today." And I didn't believe in things, like visions and, a precognition and so forth. But, we had been married for many, many years. And there were times in our lives together when she would have such visions. And they were all good things, but they all played out exactly the way that she told me that they would. So logic told me if she was right then, she could be right now. So I watched over my three children, as most parents would do, because that's what you think of, and I kept tabs on them throughout the day, even though, one was at college and the other was someplace else. And at the end of the day, I let that fade from my awareness. Okay, I made it through the day. There's nothing there. And we make a long story short, we went out to dinner. We had two cars. And on the way home, my son and my daughter were in one car, and they had a horrible accident. And my daughter didn't survive, and my son had terrible injuries. And I was obviously in shock and disbelief because I didn't, and at that point I didn't even know if I was going to lose my son as well because he was in a coma. And eventually he made a strong recovery. And after a couple of months, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I said, wait a second, how did Phran, my wife, how did she know? Because I saw her, she was trembling and she knew. That started me. I became obsessed with finding out how she knew.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know, was it a case of precognition where she saw the future? Was somebody either living or dead sending her a message? And I took the science route because that's what I needed. That's the way I thought. So I traveled across the country meeting with medical doctors and scientists and researchers that studied consciousness and studied the mind and things of that nature. And I started uncovering, all that evidence. And evidence comes in the form of near-death experiences, and mediumship and after-death communications and reincarnation and, all these things that I had never knew anything about. One thing led to another, and I started interviewing all of these people, and we started the foundation, and we're kind of the foundation is kind of a convergence of science and spirituality. I had my wife on one end who was interested in the science, but she didn't need it because she had this inner knowing, and I needed the science because I needed to know that there are credible people that have evidence about such things. So that's how I got into it.
I love the marriage of like your wife just knows and you need the science, and that's kind of how you wound up there, because she has this part that is the spiritual and you have this part that you're really driven by that science, because so many people are driven by so many different things. And some people have immediate belief in something, and some people are really pretty skeptical and they need some evidence for it. So I love that you've brought those two together and provide that through the foundation. I think that's fantastic. So generally speaking, how does belief in some sort of afterlife affect grief?
Well, there are, on the academic side, there are many clinical studies that have been published in peer-reviewed journals that show that those who believe in an afterlife do better in their grief than those who don't. And that makes sense logically, right? Because what could give you any hope except for the fact that you believe that they still exist, right? That it's not final, So that could be tremendously helpful. So we know that, we may talk about this later, but, for instance, the mediumship, I don't want to suggest that everybody that calls themselves a medium can do what they claim, because most cannot. But there are some that can. And I've witnessed, over the past 20 years, I've probably witnessed over 1,000 medium readings, because of all the events that we do. Plus, that's what I do, is I evaluate their evidence to see if that they provide. And I see a strong evidential medium reading can have tremendous positive effects on one's grief, because people walk away saying, wait, there's information that the medium could not possibly have known and had to be coming from my loved one. So I think that belief in life after death can be very, very effective in helping to transform one's grief.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I do want to kind of get into the mediumship piece of it here in just a little bit, but it's interesting that you talk about people living better lives if they have a belief in the afterlife. And it's kind of like part of that is probably driven by hope. Part of that, depending on your religion, might be driven a little bit by like fear. So does it matter what kind of afterlife you believe in, or is it just if you believe in an afterlife, you generally either live a better life or you your grief is going to be a different process or any of that?
Well, when we talk about an afterlife, everybody has their own version of an afterlife, and some have their version depends upon their religion, which you mentioned. There are a lot of people that accept that there's an afterlife. They accept it on faith, on blind faith. I mean, they haven't really seen any evidence, but this is what they've been taught. Others, approach it, more of a non-religious but a spiritual, type of thing. But the key component with a belief in an afterlife is does the way in which you live your life, your physical life, affect your existence in the next life? What we've found is that it's all about self-judgment. So near-death experiences, those people are clinically dead. They meet every definition of death that medical science has. No brain waves, no respiration, no heartbeat, no reflexes. They're dead. And yet they come back and they have all these sensory, clear, and lucid, experiences. But a lot of them report having this life review. You've probably heard the term. And in that life review, their whole life flashes, before them, and they feel all of the good and the joy that they imparted to others, and but at the same time, they feel, tangible feelings of all the harm that they cause, to others. I would imagine that doesn't feel so good, So it's an incentive, to live a loving and compassionate life. What I believe is that in the afterlife, everything's about self-judgment. We go to a sphere or a realm where we're surrounded by others of like mind, whereas somebody who did a lot of evil things. I don't believe in a heaven and hell, but I think that people constantly progress in the afterlife realms based upon in help that they get from others and learning, and they have a totally different perspective than when they were embodied in the physical life. So, to answer your question, I think just the belief that death is not final. If you could come to believe that, it would allow you to live your life without fear. And with more meaning and purpose, because you're not constantly thinking about it every day. Oh, what if this? If you believe that life is a continuum, then that can really have positive effects on your everyday life.
Yeah, most definitely. I had a really interesting conversation. I have a 9-year-old and he'll be 16 on Friday, a 16-year-old. But right now he's 15. So we had a conversation in the car about what happens after death. And I think my 9-year-old brought it up and said, like, scientifically, what happens? And I said, well, I can tell you about like decomposition, but what are you really asking? And he was talking about afterlife. And I said, well, what do you think happens? And he started talking about reincarnation, and there was something else, and he like combined two different things. But it was just really interesting because I haven't raised my kids to be very religious. I was raised Baptist / Church of Christ, and it was very, in some ways, very harmful, in my opinion. But I have not raised my kids to be religious. However, they know that I believe in God, and I do believe in an afterlife, and I believe in all of these things. So more just kind of the spiritual side. But I've never talked about reincarnation with him. So it was really interesting to hear from a kid's perspective. What do you think? So it's neat to kind of get different people's takes on what they feel like an afterlife might look like.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people's beliefs are based upon a lot of influences, their cultural, societal influences, education, clergy, I mean, so our beliefs are filtered by our environment. That's why it's so fascinating when children talk about these things, because,
Yeah.
especially when they're young, because they haven't been, it's pure. I
Indoctrinated.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, they haven't been indoctrinated, right?
So, how did your personal beliefs impact your experience after your wife's passing? You went through all this with your daughter, and then you lost your wife a couple of years ago. Was it any easier for you, do you think?
You know, intellectually and in my heart, I know that that she still exists. It's just an inner knowing that I've developed over the years. However, that doesn't take away the pain of not having them physically, with you. I mean, I was married for 46 years, so I hardly remember not, being married to her. So it's like part of you, dies. However, the difference between the two is that when my daughter died, I didn't believe in an afterlife.
Right.
And now, of course, I do. I'm convinced of it. So what that allows you to do, the grief is still as crushing as it was, when I lost my daughter. I mean, there's no getting around that. However, I'm able to navigate my life because I could dig myself out, so to speak, of those deep chasms of despair, because I just say to myself, well, that, and I can go through everything that I've learned over the years, and so I know that it's a temporary, and one day I'll see her again, and so forth. So in that respect, I hate to say, better prepared, but the knowing that I have enabled me to go on with my life a lot quicker than when my daughter passed. Because my daughter passed, I was a total basket case. I just wanted to die. I really wished that I would die, and I saw no way of going on. I don't have those feelings now. So it's different. It's equally crushing, but I'm better prepared.
Yeah. Yeah. And no, I mean, no two losses are the same either. You can't really compare the loss of one to the loss of another, but it does sound like just your preparations and your reaction to how you turned your life after your daughter's death really did prepare you a little bit better. And it's interesting to hear, So how do you weigh the scientific research side versus what individuals have personally experienced related to death and life after death? And is one better than the other when it comes to influencing someone else's beliefs?
I always talk about, getting to that. I think it's a stage when it comes to the afterlife. It starts with a hope. There's a lot of people, if you ask them if they believe in an afterlife, they'll say, yeah, but what they're really saying is that they hope that there's an afterlife. And then eventually with things that they learn, that hope moves to a belief. And some people, that belief morphs into an inner knowing. And there's several ways you can get to the knowing stage. One is the route that I took and it took me many, many years. I'd say probably took me 7 years of researching until I relented and said, okay. But that's from reading books about the evidence. It's from, talking to scientists about the evidence, talking to friends about their experiences and so forth. But reading about the science is not as strong as somebody that, as you mentioned, that has a personal experience. If somebody's had, for instance, their deceased loved one comes to them, we call it a dream visitation. That's the most common form of after-death communication, where your monkey mind or your chatter mind is during the REM stage of sleep is set aside, and that there's a conduit, for your loved ones to get through. And they may, during such dreams, they're very tactile. People can talk to their loved one or hug them or smell them or kiss them, and they wake up, and this is sometimes it's a life-changing experience, or sometimes people actually have their loved ones appear to them, or there's a an extraordinary sign that comes up, or a synchronicity that can't be explained. Then there are things in the extreme, like a near-death experience and so forth. So the quickest way to get there is if you're lucky enough to get one of these direct, personal communications. I I once did a survey that I sent out to our membership, and part of the survey, I asked a simple question. I said, would you rather get a communication from your deceased loved one through a medium or directly to you? When I asked that question, I totally believed that the overwhelming response was going to be directly, whatever. But it wasn't the case. More people said through a medium. So I started to ask why. One thing you talked about earlier is that some people have a fear of the unknown, so they don't trust themselves. Two, a lot of people think that if they're communicating with their loved one, it's all in their mind. They're making it up, maybe because of their grief. Whereas if it was coming through a professional, a third party, they could trust the information. So I'm always learning, too. But I think they're equally important. For me, I was having all these personal experiences that were happening around me that I didn't recognize and I wouldn't acknowledge because I didn't believe in it. So the science opened me up to receiving these, personal communications.
Interesting. I think that I originally, when you started asking that question, I think I would have said firsthand, like I would like to have it happen to me versus get something through a medium. But I almost agree. I feel like getting it through a medium, if it's something that medium could not have known about, that would have to be the thing. Like I would have to know that it's something the medium could not have known about. There'd have to be some sort of sign that it was true and authentic. But yeah, then it's like irrefutable almost, because it's just there. There's no way to say, well, you're just making that up. It's like, no, that's true. So you've mentioned a couple of these already, but what are some of the examples of after-death communication or other types of psychic phenomena that point to life after death being quite real, aside from heaven, hell, faith-based type framework?
Yeah. Well, first of all, in order to believe in life after death, you have to come to the realization that our mind and our brain are not the same. The brain is an apparatus that interprets information, but our mind can extend beyond the body. So sometimes, let's say you're thinking of a friend that you haven't thought of in 30 years, and then the phone rings and it's your friend. How does that happen? People have telepathic experiences, ESP. I once did an experiment of remote viewing, where remote viewers are people that are able to, first of all, the government had a team of remote viewers back during the Cold War, the CIA, and they would give these people coordinates, latitude and longitude, and they would give it to the remote viewers, and they would ask the remote viewers to extend their consciousness to those coordinates, and then draw a picture of what they see. And they were usually like missile silos or war factories and things of that nature. So I did an experiment like that where I told people that I was going to draw a different picture every night for 5 consecutive nights. And I asked people to sort of, even if they think it's impossible, kind of tune in during a 15-minute same interval every night and just draw a picture of what they think I'm drawing. And all I said was I was going to draw a picture. So, I mean, the odds of them guessing are like millions to one. I could be anything.
Literally anything.
I drew a series of pictures, one each night. And on the last night, I said, in my mind, I said, okay, I'm going to mess with everybody. I'm not going to draw a picture. I'm going to draw a geometric shape. And I drew concentric circles, with a dot in the middle. And we ended the experiment, and people started mailing in their stuff. And I was looking at them, and I was kind of disappointed. Some of them, maybe you could stretch one, but it was really nothing significant. And the very last envelope I received was a woman that was in Portland, Oregon. And she drew 3 out of the 5 pictures exact. I could put them side by side,
Wow.
including the concentric circles that I did. Now, oddly enough, I drew those concentric circles on a Friday. She drew them on Wednesday. So, then it raises the question of who was remote viewing who. But you see,
Yeah.
logically, how is this possible? I was sitting in New York at the time with my brain in my head, and she was sitting in 3,000 miles away in Oregon with her brain in her head. So if the mind and the brain were the same, how is it possible for that to happen? It's not. When I say our mind, you could use the term our consciousness or our
Yeah.
soul, whatever you prefer, but it shows you things like that our consciousness extends beyond the body, and if that's true, once the physical brain is gone, the consciousness, still continues, so life after death is possible. So some of the things that we talk about, I mentioned near-death experiences are very compelling evidence, because people that are clinically dead, sometimes they can even talk about being above their body and seeing everything that's going on, and then you can actually see if that's true. There are cases of in mediumship, some people have the ability to communicate with discarnate entities because it's still telepathic communication. It just so happens that one person, the person that died, doesn't have a body anymore, but they still have a mind. So it's still telepathic mind-to-mind communication. Reincarnation. There have been scientists, a medical doctor at the University of Virginia, Ian Stevenson, for 40 years, researched past life memories of children. So the children would describe a past life. They would document every detail, and then they would go to medical records and school records, and they can investigate all these things. And in some cases, they were even able to go to if the child remembered where they used to live and his prior family, could go to that family. So, there are thousands and thousands of these cases, and the evidence, is very compelling. And then the term after-death communications is very broad. It could be, anything. I can give you a personal example. I had after when my wife was with me, I always had this thing. I always loved her hands. She had warm, soft hands. I used to love to hold her hand, and I'd be a real pain in the neck. I mean, we'd be in the car, and I'd hold. She'd be sitting next to me. I'd hold my thumb up, so she would. It gave me a feeling of warmth if she grabbed my finger, And even sometimes we're lying in bed watching TV, I do, and sometimes she'd say, "Enough already," I know. But after she passed, every time I was driving in the car, and I had the empty seat next to me, I would hold out my thumb. I'd hold it up next to her, and I'd say, in my mind, I'd ask her to grab it. I'm doing this for 2 years, nothing. So one day, it was about 3-4 months ago. I'm driving in the car, and I said out loud, I said, "Okay, Phran, I really need you to do this, and then all of a sudden, I feel my thumb, it starts vibrating, and at the base of my thumb, and there's energy running up and down my thumb, up and down my thumb, and I'm feeling, somebody grasp it. So that I didn't, it had 2 years I'm asking, I didn't get it. There's no other explanation for it. And that was attached to a knowing. I knew that, that was her. And I just thanked her, verbally. And it's never happened again since. But I think she was just, she knew the way I thought. And she was waiting to come up with something that I wouldn't question, and that was it. So people have these kind of extraordinary experiences all the time, but they don't talk about it. They don't talk about it because they're afraid they're going to be judged or labeled by their friends or their colleagues or their family. So, we encourage people, if you have an experience, just share it with others. I mean, who cares what they think? But if more and more people start sharing these dreams that they have and all these other synchronicities that happen and signs that can't be explained, then it would become more acceptable in the mainstream.
Yeah, you never know who's going to say, "Hey, something similar happened to me." And then you've got this shared experience to talk about, which is great.
Yeah, it happens all the time.
Are most mediums relying on mind and word tricks, or are there some who can truly speak to the dead?
So when I wrote my book, The Medium Explosion, I wrote it because there's a proliferation of mediums today that can't do what they claim. Because of all the TV shows and that came out, and everybody wants to be like so and so. They think that they could do it. We all have some degree of intuitive ability, but not everybody can communicate with the dead, and they shouldn't be mediums. So in my book, I said that 85 to 90% of all of in my opinion, 85 to 90% of all the mediums out there today cannot do what they claim. That didn't make me very popular in the mediumship world, but but my point was that 10% can, and they can, with extraordinary, evidence. So I would say that sure, there are mediums today that resort to fraud and cold reading techniques, and it's horrible. Because mediums have a tremendous responsibility. Of this, they're not mental health professionals, but yet they're sitting with people in that are in severe grief sometimes, and they're in a very fragile state, and they could do a lot more harm than good. So I always counsel mediums to never say anything that might lead people to believe that they are grief counselors. But I do know that unofficially, lots of times they're acting in that capacity because they can have a tremendous effect on the mental state of the people that they're sitting with.
Yeah, there's a huge difference between a grief counselor and a medium, right? One is trying to help you through something, and one is trying to contact someone for you. So that's really critical, I feel like. Bite Mark asks, do you have any tips for determining which mediums are faking?
It's really difficult because one of the mediums that we had certified had told me of a story where, especially when COVID hit, mediums stopped doing readings in person, so they were doing it on Zoom and other platforms. So he caught a medium that had a split screen on the medium's computer, and on one side he was seeing the sitter, the person getting the reading, and the other side of the screen he had that person's Facebook page open, and the medium was just spitting back to the sitter all of this information, and the sitter just was saying, wow, we thought this was the greatest medium in the world. The medium was a total fraud, So, now you have to be very, very careful. 100 years ago, but, the internet didn't exist, and when people gathered, you couldn't research anything on them. And now, with one click, you could find out their whole life story. We've been, since 2005, I've been testing mediums under controlled conditions. They do a series of 5 readings. It's an involved process. Sitters are trained in how to score it. They know the difference between general information and specific information. And if they meet our proficiency guidelines, they gain certification with us. They can't pay to go through the process or pay to be listed. It's totally, we have to protect the integrity of the program. But we found that the mediums that we have certified over the years, many have gone on to be famous, which is maybe not such a good thing because that means their availability is less and less. And we have it as a resource for the bereaved. So that's one resource. If you go on foreverfamilyfoundation.org, we have a tab with all the mediums. And since 2005, there are only 26 mediums on there. So it's not a lot of mediums over 17 years, Yeah. We're very, very selective. Other than that, referrals from other people, word of mouth, but you can't always rely on that because mediumship is not an exact process. I could get a wonderful reading from a medium, and then you could go to that same medium, and for whatever reason, it's not happening. There has to be a synchronicity between the medium, the sitter, and the person in spirit And if it's not meshing, the process is not going to happen. There are some reliable resources, but it's challenging because there are no regulatory bodies that govern mediumship. I mean, you tomorrow can go out and call yourself a medium and hang out a shingle and start charging people several $100s for a reading. And there's no licensing. There are no ethical guidelines. There's no continuing education. There's no grief education. It's a problem, especially considering that they're working with people in fragile states. So,
Oh yeah.
you have to be very careful. And then, there are some tips. I mean, if the medium just keeps giving you general stuff, I mean, if you're seeing me and you tell me, hey, Bob, I have your great grandmother. Is your great grandmother passed? Well, yeah, she'd be 130 is a good bet. So the sitter, it's a true statement, so the sitter, if they were scoring it, would have to mark it as a true statement. But if the medium said to me, Bob, I have your great grandmother Rebecca here, and gives me some other information, and that's true, that evidence has to be weighted more heavily than that broad general statement.
So I'm interested in how you test mediums. So you have someone, is it consistently the same people going and testing these mediums, like the same sitter?
No, I mean, what I over the years, I have a pool of sitters that I've trained. I mean, there's a lot of people on the list, and and we mix it up because the sitters, they know about mediumship, they know about scoring. I make sure that the medium does not have any knowledge of the sitter, or the sitter doesn't have any knowledge of who that medium is, and the mediums go from sitter to sitter, doing a series of 5 different readings. So it's based on a composite of all 5. So if they do one good reading, it doesn't mean they're going to pass. It has to be consistently good among the 5 readings. So there is a way. I mean, scientists have studied it. I mean, I picked up a lot of information from meeting with these scientists that study mediumship, and I devised my own program. I thought I improved upon it, but I use a lot of their input in determining. So you can, using scientific conditions, you can evaluate the evidence that they provide, and no medium's going to pass if they're a charlatan. It's not possible.
Right. Right. Yeah. Really interesting. So when you go to a medium, what should you expect when you sit with one?
Well, first of all, you don't have to physically be with them, because the evidence shows that the quality of the information is the same whether you're sitting physically in front of them or 3,000 miles away on the phone. Because think about it, they're communicating with another dimension. What difference does a couple of miles, or when you're dealing with interdimensional communication? So there are certain things that you want to do. You don't want to divulge information to the medium. You don't, and certainly when you're setting up the reading, you don't want to give them identifying information. And it's hard because people are in grief and they desperately want to talk to their loved one, and they tend to latch on to anything that the medium says because they really want to believe that the communication is taking place. So you have to, as hard as it is, you have to. You give the medium yes or no type answers. You don't feed the medium. You don't give them information. They have to give you the information. But it's important to acknowledge, when something is true, so the medium knows if they're on the right track. But and you can tell. Also, sometimes people they go to a medium because they have one specific person in the spirit realm that they want to talk to. And the medium might be bringing through like 3 or 4 other people that and sometimes people have blinders on because they only want to hear from that one person, and they don't acknowledge any of the other information that's factual, So it's to a lot of people, going to a medium is somewhat of a uneasy or even frightening experience. They don't know, what to expect. But mediums are just normal people like everybody else. They just have a heightened ability,
Yeah, it's really interesting. I personally have never been to a medium. Not that I wouldn't. I've just never, had the chance or felt the need to, I guess. But it's interesting. I know a lot of people who swear by going to mediums and getting these points of contact through mediums, and
Yeah, in all the years I've been doing this, I never got a reading, and neither did my wife, from any of our mediums. And we've had some of the best mediums in the world on our list. And the only reason that I never asked them for a reading is because a lot of them, most of them, know too much about me, so I couldn't trust the information,
that's fair.
And I know that they would never resort to,
Sure.
the devious things, but I still, in my mind, I have to be able to trust it. So there was after Phran, passed. One of my friends, actually Leslie Kane, who wrote the book Surviving Death, upon which the Netflix series was based, when she was researching her book, she went to Europe and had some readings from some well-known mediums there. And when she came back to the U.S., she was actually sat with a few readings with a medium from Ireland. When she came back, she called me and she asked if she could come out to the house and if I could. She'd bring the transcripts of the readings with her, and she asked if I could score them for accuracy because she knew that's what I did, and she did. And the medium was incredible. The medium had like 95% accuracy. I was blown away. So we'll tell her to apply for our program. So after Phran passed, Leslie said, "Do you want to get a reading with this medium?" Actually, her name was Sandra O'Hara, and she's since passed on to spirit herself. And I said, "Yeah, you know what? I agree to that on one condition. I'm only going to give the name Bob, and that's it. And there's God knows how many Bobs there
Right?
are.
Yeah, there's a lot of Bobs.
She couldn't research, and I said, I won't pay for the money for the reading with my own funds because that leaves a trail. So I asked her to pay for the reading using her PayPal account, and she paid for it that way. And I got a reading, and it was a wonderful reading, and she was like 95% accurate, and it was very helpful to me, and I really appreciated it. So that maybe that's going to an extreme, but that's what I needed so I could trust the information.
I mean, I feel like that's fair. I think that I would need something similar. Like I would need to go through a friend to set it up and to pay for it and everything. Because I wouldn't want to go in with someone having the ability to research stuff. Like my life has not been the most like smooth sailing. So there's been a lot of tragedies in the family and just things in my life. And so it's one of those things that like I don't want anybody to be able to get that background before I go in.
Yeah, I mean,
there's a lot to pull from.
Exactly. And you know what? There's also a difference between psychics and mediums, because psychic information is mind-to-mind communication from the living, and all mediums are psychic, but not all psychics have the ability to communicate, with the deceased. So you might go to somebody that calls themselves a medium, and they'll tell you that you just painted your bedroom blue, which is extraordinary information if that was true, but it doesn't do anything for proving that there's life after death,
Yeah. So how do you tell the difference between a medium and a psychic without medium abilities?
Well, if it becomes, first of all, the medium should always divulge that before the reading, and an ethical medium, since they are psychic, if they're giving you a piece of psychic information, they should identify it as such, saying this is the psychic that I'm picking up from your energy. But there are some that don't. So if you're going to a medium and all they're talking about is you're going to meet somebody and fall in love in 2 years, I mean, how do you verify that? And if they're giving you information about your life, I mean that's good if that's what you went there for. But it becomes evident right away if they're able to communicate with any disclaimer because the evidence has to come. There's there are a lot of mediums, especially those that are not good, that they believe that their role is to give you a message. Like I want you to know that he loves you, and all this general stuff, which may be true, but in order for you to accept a message from your loved one, the medium first has to give you specific evidence so that you know that they're really talking to your loved one. So if I'm giving you a reading now and I'm telling you that your grandfather loves you, of course he probably does, but
Right.
what value is that unless I tell you 5 things about your grandfather that nobody
Right.
else would know, you know?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, especially in the case of a loved one, I don't know that you really go to a medium if you know that somebody hated you. Do you go to a medium to contact them for one last, like, FU or something? What's the.
Yeah. Well, I've seen that. Some people do.
Really? That's too much effort. Holding on to that hate is too much effort.
Yeah, I know.
So we talked
Well,
about. Oh, go ahead.
you see all sorts of stuff. I've been in sessions, and when medium is doing a group reading, and medium comes, I saw a medium go to somebody and and brought through somebody, one of the relatives that she didn't want to hear from, and she said, I hated that SOB when he was alive. I don't want to talk to him now, so.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, okay. Now that's all right. So maybe go to a medium to get info they refused to give while they were alive if you were on bad terms. That's a good point too. I mean, I could see that a little bit.
Yeah. What was the question? What?
It wasn't a question, just a statement. Like somebody might go to a medium to get information they refused, like the secret family recipe for cupcakes.
Yeah. Well. Yeah. I mean, and some people. Some people do go to mediums because they're looking, for instance, they're looking for where the will is, or
Oh yeah.
where something with jewelry was, and that could be a psychic exercise, or it could be a mediumistic endeavor where the medium is communicating with somebody, their loved one, who's telling them, where that is. So that could go both ways.
I'm sure not everyone believes in life after death. I mean, we talked about that a little bit already, but how do you respond when someone trivializes or argues about there being life after death in some way with you?
I never judge anybody for that, because I was one of those people, so I mean, I'm not now, but I was, so I totally understand. And because I was ignorant of the evidence. So I have a lot of patience, and we never ever try to convince anybody. Our job is really just to educate people and provide information. You make your own judgment, based upon the information. I could tell you a funny thing that about 3 months before my daughter died, I was playing golf with a friend of mine, my friend Kenny, and Kenny had just lost his wife to breast cancer, and we're waiting to tee off the next hole, and Kenny turns to me and he says, Bob, I have to tell you something. I said, why? He said, I went to a medium. So like alarm bells start going off. He says, and she was telling me all sorts of things about his wife that she couldn't possibly have known. And he's talking to me, and then he turns to me. He saw that look in my eyes that people now, the same look I get from other people, and he said, you don't believe any of this, do you? And all I could muster was, well, who knows, Kenny, and I remember going home and telling my wife, I'm so upset, Kenny's going to some gypsy fortune teller, and she's going to take him for all his money, and his grief is so overwhelming, and that forth. And now I look at my life, fast forward 20 years later, and we're involved with all this stuff, including, mediums. So I don't have a problem that don't believe. They haven't seen any evidence, and why would they believe? It's a pretty hard concept. You say, what could possibly survive? When no more, what could survive? So I don't have a problem with it, but I do think that, and that's why I was happy to take part in that Netflix series, because all it accomplishes is it just gets people to think. That's all we want, people to open their minds and explore, and then make their own kind of judgment.
Yeah. I feel like that's the whole reason we have religion, is to try to answer that question of where did we come from and where do we go? Now it's a Cotton Eye Joe song, though, so now we've stepped into different territory. So do you recommend therapy in addition as a way to support the grieving process or to cope with grief? You know, we've talked about grief counselors very briefly, but is that something that you recommend for people?
Yeah, I mean, everybody is different. I mean, if you need therapy, absolutely, and that's what we always tell people. I mean, if you need therapy, but absolutely, go and get it. I mean, we don't try to replace, therapy. Although, we used to hold these afterlife discussion groups across the country. We don't do it in person anymore, but people, and we used to constantly explain to people that we're not grief counselors. We're just here to share information. But people found it became like grief therapy for them because people shared their experiences and they talked about things and they found it very helpful. I mean, I went to before the foundation was formed, I went to a grief counselor for a short period of time. I didn't find it helpful to me, but a lot of people do.
Yeah. Kind of goes back to just whatever works for you.
Yeah.
There are really common accepted practices for grieving: meditations, journaling, screaming into a pillow, whatever. Are there any practices that are pretty typical for grieving that you have found are actually harmful to the person mourning or that hinder the grieving process in some way?
All those things you mentioned are good. I mean, meditate, anything you can do to sort of quiet your mind and through meditation and all these other being immersed in nature and so forth are all good things. Sometimes what disturbs me is that in the mental health profession, in formal therapy, there are many professionals who tell their patients that they need to disassociate, from their loved one, and to get on, with their life. Sometimes that can be harmful. I mean, I think a lot of progressive thinking professionals do the opposite. They talk about continuing bonds and keeping a relationship with your loved one, of course, in a different way, but maintaining a relationship, and that's been, very effective. But as you said, everybody's different. But when you're grieving, you try anything that makes you feel better. You try,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I think that's absolutely the way that I've felt things is just like, does this work? Yes, great. I'm gonna keep doing it. Does this work? No. Okay, I'm gonna stop doing that.
Right.
If you can be mindful about what's helping and what's not.
Right.
Are there any resources or exercises that you feel like everyone who has experienced the loss of a loved one could benefit from, regardless of what they personally believe in life after death?
Yeah, there's people that have sought help. What's harmful to a lot of people in grief is they start replaying this loop constantly, and it's really debilitating, and and it can be crushing, and they just can't break that loop. It could be a scene of how their loved one died, or something that they just keep replaying, and they can't break out of it. And in those cases, EMDR, which is based on eye movement desensitization. I don't know how it works, and the people that administer it can't tell you either. But what happens is that through these series of rapid eye movements, you're able to break out of that loop. And people, it's used a lot with war veterans that have PTSD, and it's a very effective form of therapy. Going one step further, there's a doctor by the name of Alan Botkin. He's retired now, but he was treating all these war veterans with EMDR, and one time he made a mistake and he threw in an extra movement, and all of a sudden the veteran that was sitting in front of him started talking to his deceased loved one. And he said, well, okay, that's pretty weird, never
Oh,
experienced anything like
wow.
that. So then he tried it again. He threw in that extra thing. And again, a different patient was seeing a buddy of his, in war that had passed on and was having a conversation with him. And then he documented this protocol and he brought it to his colleagues, and he said, here, we'll see if you could replicate this. And lo and behold, they were trying it with their patients, and 70 to 75% of the patients were experiencing the same thing. So it's called IADC, induced after death communication, and there are certain mental psychologists that are trained in that, and it's been an effective in grief therapy. I mean, it doesn't work for everybody, but it works for a large percentage of people.
Induced after death communication. Interesting. That's one that I'm gonna bookmark this link over here to read later because I want to know more about that. And we got a second in chat. The second the EMDR suggestion worked wonders for me with some complex grief. Not going to be the best option for everyone, but when it is, it's awesome. Yeah, I've heard very good things. I've also heard from people that it just didn't do anything for them, but I don't think I've heard from anyone that it's harmful. So maybe give it a try if that's something that your therapist specializes in, or if you can find somebody who specializes in that. It doesn't hurt.
Yeah, I mean, like it goes back. I think you're right. I mean, I haven't heard any reports where it's harmful. So certainly worth trying. Over the years, I mean, like Alan Bakken invited me to go out to his place, and he would do some personal sessions with me. But life got too busy, and I never tried it. I wish I did.
Yeah, it would be interesting. It would definitely be interesting. So if you weren't doing what you do now, if your life had not taken the turn that it did, what would you be doing instead?
Well, this for most of my life, I mean, I was in the insurance business, and I pretty much almost a year or two out of college. I did that for 40 years. Wow. I mean, I had a successful business, and and I made some money, but I never felt fulfilled. And what I always wanted to be was always wanted to be an advertising copywriter, and I wonder if that, if I didn't decide to get into the business. I went on an interview out of college to try to the big advertising firm, and I didn't get the job. I often wonder, what if I did? How would my life change? But but once we formed the foundation, I mean, that kind of took over. That became our lives, and we just devoted, all of our time to that. So I don't know. I mean, I also, being an English major, I always loved to write, and now that that I have some time, I'm retired, and I'm not doing foundation stuff. I write, so I just finished my second book, and so I'm getting, I'm writing the blog, so I'm sort of getting to do the things that I never got a chance to do before, and things I enjoy. I really enjoy. I mean, I hated, especially near the end, I hated getting up and going to work when I was, in the insurance business. I just couldn't stand it anymore, But so I guess I'm doing now things that I wish I had done years ago.
I love that. It's never too late to kind of turn and lean back on some of those things that you really enjoyed when you were not necessarily a slave to a 9-to-5.
Right.
Well, it is time for the magic moment. I do happen to have a magic wand right here. So if you could wave this magic wand, I always hit my mic with this thing. I don't know why I can't control it better, but if you could wave this magic wand and eliminate one common opinion or misconception or theory surrounding mental illness, disabilities, or talking about mental health or grief or loss, what would it be? And I'll just give this little wave for you and you can go at it.
I think it's something that we touched on already. I've seen so many cases of people after seeing mental health professionals that are misdiagnosed and put on some heavy meds when it turns out that they're incredibly psychic and incredibly intuitive. And that's a shame because that those are gifts that should be embraced instead of treated. And of course, there are many people where treatment with medication is absolutely indicated, I don't think that a lot of the professionals are really trained on the other side of it, how to tell the difference. So I just wish that more care was given, to patients before they're labeled and put in a box. And then sometimes we know that medication can be tremendously helpful, and other times can do just the opposite. So I've had too many friends that were put on meds, and then they had trouble regulating the meds, and it's resulted in horrible things like suicide and so forth. So I guess that's my magic wand, to eliminate these inconsistencies.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are so many horror stories of misdiagnoses and mismedication and all of that kind of stuff. I really wish that there was a better way to make sure that a diagnosis is correct, make sure the medicines are working, some sort of follow-up mandated and something. There's got to be a better way. Maybe it's more training, like you're saying, maybe it's more training in different things that's required. But yeah, I agree. That would be a really wonderful thing to eliminate if we could. So I'll open up to any remaining community questions. If you have anything that we haven't mentioned, go ahead and ask it in the chat. And then while we're doing that, if there's nothing if there's something that we didn't mention that you want to talk about, Bob, I would just open this up to you and kind of give you the floor.
Well, I would just encourage people to, as I mentioned before, just to start opening up to others about things that they experience. I mean, if nothing else, some people might be somewhat, fascinated by it when these incredible things happen. Too many people keep it stuffed up. When we used to have these groups, people used to walk in these discussion groups, and people would sit the whole 2 hours and would not say a word. They just sit there, with their hands clasped, and then maybe they come to the next meeting, and again they wouldn't say anything, and then they come to the third meeting, and all of a sudden they feel comfortable. They know they're in a safe environment, and they start opening up about experiences. And I couldn't believe the stuff that I was hearing. It's like, why didn't you tell us about this? Because people have to be in a comfortable, place. So I just encourage people to, to talk about these things. And if people don't understand, they don't understand. So be it. It's your life, and you do what you want to do. So other than that, I just encourage people to keep exploring and keep learning, and just be open to everything.
Yeah, I think that's the key, is remain open to things. That's what I tell. Listen, I'm going to relate this to my kid, because I have to tell my 9-year-old, you need to approach this next bite with an open mind and an open heart, because you're going to try it. He's a very picky eater, and I'm like, you got to try it. And if you go into it going, I don't want to try this, then you're not going to like it. But if you go into it with an open heart and an open mind, maybe you'll find something that you do like.
Yeah, mind over matter, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Well, Bite Mert says, thank you so much for coming. I learned a lot and have a lot more reading to do now. And one point that you made earlier, Bite, it was, as far as I know, it's only suggested, talking about EMDR, not to do if you have a high risk of dissociation already. So that's a good disclaimer to put on there. I forgot about that, probably because I've never done it before. So, but yeah, that's very, very valid. So, Bob, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This was a beautiful conversation. I so much appreciate you taking the time out today.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
I hope this exploration of how belief in life after death impacts the grieving process has provided you with insights, comfort, and a deeper understanding of the human experience. Grief is a super complex journey, and your beliefs can play a significant role in finding solace and meaning during times of loss. no matter what those beliefs are. Whether you hold steadfast beliefs or you're still seeking answers and trying to figure those beliefs out, I hope this episode has sparked introspection and opened the door to conversations about grief and faith. And if you're interested in more about death positivity, definitely go back and listen to my interview with Link Keller. That was a fantastic interview, and I hope that you find it just as insightful. I am deeply grateful to Bob for sharing his wisdom and personal experiences with me, and to you, our listeners, for joining me on this journey. I hope you feel supported, understood, and encouraged to explore the impact of belief systems on your own healing and resilience. If you have any comments or feedback, or you want to continue the conversation, I would absolutely love to hear from you. So feel free to share your thoughts and experiences with me on social media or through our website, tacosfallapart.org. And if you found this episode helpful, please consider leaving a review or rating on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us reach more people whenever people do leave a review or even just a rating. Thank you for tuning in to Even Tacos Fall Apart. Remember, even when we face the profound pain of loss, our beliefs can offer comfort, strength, and the assurance that love endures beyond life's greatest challenges. Until next time, take care of yourself, honor your beliefs, and embrace the healing power of connection.